The world of humanity is like unto a rose garden, and the various races, tongues, and people are like unto contrasting flowers. The diversity of colors in a rose garden adds to the charm and beauty of the scene, as variety enhances unity. Baha. But there is a need for a superior power to overcome human prejudices, a power which nothing in the world of mankind can withstand, and which will overshadow the effect of all other forces at work in human conditions. That irresistible power is the love of God. It is my hope and prayer that it may destroy the prejudice of this one point of distinction between you and unite you all permanently under its hallowed protection. Baha.
So today we're really happy to have Ms. Kathy Lee, and her topic will be From Segregation to Unity, My Personal Story. Kathy has 30 years of experience in diversity and inclusion and leadership development with leaders from 30 countries across 5 continents. She incorporates positive psychology and neuroscience into the coaching process to enable leaders to achieve their desired results, clarify their priorities, align with their values, leverage strengths, overcome limiting patterns, and build distinctive capabilities for executive success. She specializes in helping women and people of color to define their leadership purpose, presence, and impact. She has served the Baha'i Faith as a homefront pioneer to Mississippi to promote racial unity when racial segregation was the practice and racial violence was the historical norm from 1967 to 1970. Her family later pioneered to one of the homelands in South Africa, Bophuthatswana, during apartheid to contribute to racial healing and unity. Kathy has a global family. Her sons are Jamal Reimer, who lives with his family in Sweden, and Ruhi Reimer, who resides in Ashburn, Virginia. She's blessed with 6 grandchildren, Hannah, Sohaila, Aliyah, Zain, Silas, and Nuria Reimer. They're all engaged in Baha'i community building activities, which promote the oneness of humankind. So with that, I'll hand it off to Ms. Lee.
It's wonderful to see so many friends and from so many places. So thank you very much to your family for putting on these devotional gatherings and these conversations about modern perspectives. For those who are not quite familiar with the Baha'i Faith, it began in 1844 in Persia. Today it is known as Iran. And the founder of the Baha'i Faith's name is Baha'u'llah. And in English, that means the glory of God. And what I'd like to do is just give a brief overview of where the Baha'i Faith fits in the global progress of the unfolding religions of God. So we know that God is unknowable. That's beyond our description, beyond our comprehension. But our Creator, who loves us, sends us divine educators about every 500 to 1,000 years. And each of these divine educators comes with a message to advance humanity so that we're constantly growing and becoming more and more what God wants us to be, the noble human race that we are destined to become. We know some of these divine educators' names. They existed before recorded history, but the ones during recorded history know their names: Abraham, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Zoroaster, Moses. And these divine educators come with one purpose, and that is to help humanity know our Creator and love our Creator. And we do that by treating one another as we would like to be treated. So I'm going to give you that's a brief overview of where the Baha'i Faith fits. It is the most recent of the revealed religions of the world. And today it is the second most widespread religion in the world. So what I've been asked to speak on today is my personal account of our time in the segregated South from 1967 to 1970. And as you know, well, some of you may know, and some of you may not know, that the United States has quite a history, quite a complex history of race relations. So we've experienced slavery here for several centuries. And then after slavery officially ended, there was a period of maintaining racial white superiority and Black subjugation. And that period was called Jim Crow. And there were laws that made sure Black and white people did not eat together. They didn't live in the same communities. They didn't break bread together. They didn't worship together. The separation of the races was part of the land law of the land in more than half of the states in the United States. And it was only in 1964 when legislation was passed to end segregation of schools. But many of the states in the South resisted this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what the Baha'is were doing during this period to try to bring together Black and white people in unity and in harmony. So a little bit of background. The most important social teaching that Baha'u'llah has introduced to humanity for this stage of our spiritual and social development is called the oneness of mankind. And so here is something from the writings of the Baha'i Faith, and that is in every dispensation, that is in Moses's dispensation, in Jesus's dispensation, in Muhammad's dispensation, the light of divine guidance has been focused upon one central theme. In this wondrous revelation, the foundation of the faith of God and the distinguishing feature of his law is the consciousness of the oneness of mankind. Now, why does he say the consciousness? Because we have come from a period in which tribes distinguished their identities from one another and oftentimes had conflict. And then nations distinguished themselves from one another and sometimes experienced conflict. Religions distinguish one another and experience conflict. And Baha'u'llah says, now we've gone from childhood to adolescence. It's time for us to enter the period of maturity, the period of adulthood for all humanity. And this requires that we start looking at each other differently, that we start thinking about each other as members of one human family with one creator. And this family is very interesting. It's very diverse. We live all over the planet. We come from different countries. We speak different languages. We're in different colors. But thanks to science, science has now demonstrated we are 99 and 99% identical in DNA, which means we are really related to one another. Some scientists say we are related to everyone on the planet, no further distant relationship than 35th cousin. So imagine looking at one another on the screen today as if we're all relatives, because we really are. And some of the other teachings that Baha'u'llah brought on the left side of the screen is this beautiful teaching, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other. And then another teaching he brings is the importance of justice. For this to work out, for us to be one, we all have to be fair and just with each other. And the laws of the land need to be just for all people without making some superior and others suppressed and subjugated. And he said, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. And the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity. So if we're going to have unity, justice is a prerequisite. When Baha'u'llah revealed his teachings in Iran and began to spread his message, he was thrown in prison. And then his entire family was sent into exile. And his eldest son's name was Abdu'l-Baha. And this is Abdu'l-Baha as a grown man in 1912. And when he was finally released from prison, after being in prison and exile for 55 years, he came to the United States. He came to North America. He visited United States and Canada in 1912. And one of the most interesting things that Abdu'l-Baha did was to cast the light on the importance of racial unity and racial justice at a time when 28 states in the United States had laws on the books making sure the races were segregated. If a white person wanted to marry a Black person, that was forbidden by law in 28 states of the United States at the time Abdu'l-Baha came to America. And of his wonderful teachings, he said, if you desire with all your heart friendship with every race on earth, your thought, spiritual and positive, will spread. It will become the desire of others, growing stronger and stronger until it reaches the minds of all men. And then he visited one of the most premier Black universities, Howard University, which is based in Washington, D.C. On April 23rd, he gave a talk before the entire student body and faculty of Howard University. And among other things, he said, the accomplishment of the unity between the colored and white will be an assurance of the world's peace. This is how important bringing Black and whites together in this country successfully will have an impact on the possibilities of unity and peace globally. And by the way, the term colored was what was used in the vernacular back in 1912. Today, we refer to Black people as African Americans or Black people. That the terminology changes over time. After that lecture, after his talk and discourse at Howard University on the same day, he was driven to the Persian legation in Washington, D.C., and he was the guest of honor at a luncheon that the Persian legation hosted for him. And Abdu'l-Baha invited an African-American attorney by the name of Louis G. Gregory to be his honored guest at this luncheon. And of course, having an African-American guest at an official luncheon where there were white people and people from other parts of the world was against tradition in Washington, D.C. And yet Abdu'l-Baha wanted to demonstrate in deeds, not just words, the importance of bringing together Black and white people. And of course, this was quite unusual back in 1912. And yet Abdu'l-Baha was the standard bearer to demonstrate racial unity, racial justice everywhere he went in the United States. And he used the analogy of a flower garden. And he said, let all associate, therefore, in this great human garden, even as flowers grow and blend together side by side, without discord or disagreement between them. What a beautiful thing. Everybody loves flower gardens. And so to begin to think of ourselves as members of a flower garden is a wonderful way to lift up the whole concept, and that it is a spiritual as well as a social teaching that humanity is ready for. God doesn't give us teachings that are beyond our grasp. He gives us the teachings when we're ready for them. Another thing that Baha'u'llah said about people of African descent is he once compared colored people to the Black pupil of the eye surrounded by the white. In this Black pupil is seen the reflection of that which is before it, and through it, the light of the Spirit shineth forth. That metaphor has so much deep spiritual meaning. Imagine if we had no vision, as a human race, if we had no vision, and as an individual, if we had no vision. It would be very difficult. We would be operating in an impaired condition. So we're here, Baha'u'llah is saying, Black people are like the pupil of the eye through which the light of the Spirit shines forth. This is a characteristic which is necessary for all of us to benefit. It's one more reason why it's important for us to associate all colors together, because of the unique characteristics that individuals bring and can contribute to the whole, to our understanding of our humanity. So now I would like to fast forward approximately 54 years after Abdu'l-Baha came to America. And I'm just going to give you a snapshot of 3 years in one of the deep South states in Mississippi. One of the senior institutions of the Baha'i Faith, which is known as the Hands of the Cause of God. They're called hands because they do the work, they serve the cause of God. And their auxiliaries came up with the idea that this concept of the oneness of humanity needs to go into the deep South states. There were Baha'is all over the United States in the 1960s. And a lot of work had been accomplished to forge fellowship and friendship between Black and white Baha'is and Persian Baha'is as well throughout the South. But there seemed to be a need for a systematic approach to bringing the teachings of the oneness of humanity to the Deep South, particularly to the population of African Americans who were descendants from enslaved persons. And so what I'd like to do is share with you the project that they instituted. It was called the Deep South Project, and it was in 3 towns. And here at the bottom of this slide, Canton, Mississippi, Dawson, Georgia, and Winnsboro, South Carolina were the 3 stars here on the map of the location. And I'm going to talk mostly about Mississippi because that's where our family was recruited. So these are some of the Black and white Baha'i families and couples who were asked to serve on the Deep South Project. We were all recruited in 1966. And then we went to a training session by Mr. Kadem over here on the left, and his board members, Bill Tucker and Jack McCants. And here we have the Martins, we have the Millers, we have the Schwandises, here am I, and here's Dottie and George Fry. These are all families, Baha'i families, who lived in the South. Some of us lived in the North, and we were invited to participate in this project. What was the purpose of the project? I gave a brief introduction. Its purpose was to bring and highlight the teachings of the oneness of mankind to the African American population in these 3 towns. Over here are the members during our training. And for those of you who know Georgia and Roy Miller from Nashville, Tennessee, this is Magdalene Carney. She later served on our national governing body, and after that served in the Baha'i World Center in Haifa, Israel, as a member of the International Teaching Center. So all of us were assigned to go to Mississippi. A little bit about the environment and about the Deep South, for those of us who may not be familiar. This is a map of the distribution of the numbers of extrajudicial, that means illegal, non-legal murders of African American people, mostly in the southern states. But you see these distribution goes up to the north and a little bit to the west. These are called lynchings. Lynchings from 1877 to 1950, over 4,000 African Americans were killed in this manner, especially in the Deep South. Mississippi had the highest number of reported lynchings in the United States. A little bit more about Mississippi. In 1964, there was a big civil rights push to help register African American citizens to vote. Only 1% of the Black population in Canton, Mississippi was registered to vote in 1964. Now, this is 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and this was 10 years after the Brown versus Board of Education law, which was passed that said schools should not be segregated. But Black people were not permitted to vote in Mississippi for a variety of strategies were used to intimidate and to threaten their lives or their livelihoods if they tried to register to vote. So let's take a look at what was going on in Canton just before the arrival of these Baha'i families in that town. Just down the road, during the Freedom Summer of 1964, when civil rights workers came to register Black people to vote, 3 of them were killed. They were murdered just down the road from Canton, Mississippi. And these civil rights workers were John Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. Let's take a look at what was going on in Canton directly. Just a couple years before the arrival of these Baha'i families, 2 Black African-American citizens were lynched in Canton, Mississippi. One was just 14 years old. And then at the end of the Freedom Summer in October, white supremacists bombed a Freedom House. Let's take a look at the Freedom House and that bombing. The Freedom House is where civil rights volunteers came to help with voter registration, and their dwelling was bombed.
Another night, we were sitting out, and a car actually pulled into the driveway. They were clearly, sort of sizing us up. And at one point, one of them said, we've been hearing stories in the gas station about people who want to do you folks harm. They want to, blow this place up. And we thought, well, that's interesting. It wasn't until later in early October that Freedom House was in fact blown up. And people inside of it could easily have been killed if it hadn't been for just accidental circumstances of where they were. And the fact that the bomb, a very powerful dynamite bomb, was placed under it was one of those buildings that was up on stilts, and so you could crawl under it. It was placed directly in the center of the house. But what they didn't know, what the bombers didn't know, is that it was placed directly under Freedom School books, the Freedom Library, of boxes that were packed floor to ceiling. One of the things that people in the North did was contribute books for the Freedom Library, more books than we could possibly use. And so they'd just been stored in the center of the Freedom House. Bomb was right under this stash of books. And we think that the reason nobody was killed in that house, and there were people in the house, was because those books absorbed the concussion of the bomb.
So now what I'd like to do, friends, is to share a little bit of what happened after these 3 Baha'i families, 1 African-American Baha'i family and 2 white Baha'i families, moved into Canton, Mississippi. This is the county courthouse in Canton. And for those of you who've seen the movie Time to Kill, it's a movie based on the book by John Grisham. The movie was filmed, the courtroom scene was in this courthouse in that film, Time to Kill. These are some houses on the white side of town. These are the houses on the Black side of town. So you can see the differentiation immediately in terms of the poverty and the conditions under which African Americans lived in Canton, Mississippi in 1967. Now, the Deep South Project had a very simple approach. All the families were advised to purchase their homes, not rent their homes, because eventually when we started to bring Black and white people together in our homes, if we rented our homes, we would likely get evicted, thrown out of a rented property. So we all had to purchase our homes. So the Millers and Mag Carney had a home on the Black side of town because races were separated in terms of housing. And the 2 white Baha'i families bought their homes on the white side of town. We were advised to spend at least a year to get acquainted with the people and the customs of the town and to let them know us so that we could become known as upright, law-abiding citizens who were truthful, honest, and lived with integrity. The next stage was to have a delegation of our families meet with the mayor, the chief of police, and the sheriff to explain to them that we are Baha'is, and this is after getting acquainted for a year, explain to them we are Baha'is and that Baha'is believe in the oneness of humanity and racial equality and justice, and that we will be having interracial meetings in our homes, in all 3 homes, and that these officials are welcome to join us anytime. We have nothing to hide. We will not be breaking any laws. We are obedient to the government and to the laws of the land. And we don't drink alcohol. We don't do drugs. And we are law-abiding citizens. And thirdly, once we started having the interracial gatherings in our homes, we wanted them to know this and be apprised of it from us rather than hearing it through rumors. So we wanted to make this an official courtesy call to these elected officials. And now I'm going to just show you some of the photographs from our interracial gatherings in 1968, 1969, and 1970. These were spiritual and social gatherings. We ate together. We prayed together. We learned together. We studied together. We sang songs together. Our children came together. And our whole purpose was to help young people, children, older people, people of all generations come together in unity, Black and white. And just to mention, those of you who might be familiar with the term, the Ku Klux Klan, better known as the KKK, was very active in Mississippi. Also, the White Citizens Council, which was a white supremacist organization that would intimidate people who believed and tried to bring Black and white together. They would go to your employment and they would make sure you got fired from your employment if you did anything to bring Black and white people together socially. So here are some of the children together. This is now in the Miller's home. And by the way, Georgia Miller was one of the chefs in the governor's mansion in Nashville, Tennessee, for the governor of Tennessee. She was the chef. And you can see these beautiful fruit bowls, grapefruit bowls that she created with her own hands. Every time we would eat at the Miller home, she just put out such a beautiful table and a beautiful spread. And these are some of Magdalene Carney, Dr. Carney's students from the high school. Both Dr. Carney and I worked at Rogers High School. It was an all-Black high school during the time that we were there. And this is in our home. We would have gatherings, Black and white, in our home 3 to 4 times every week for approximately a year and a half once we started having unity gatherings in our home. This is Magdalene Carney on the left, and this is our family in our dining room on the right. The 3 families, the Millers, Mag Carney, the Schwandises, and one of the Reimers. And this is in our living room. And one of the very, it sounds very simple now, but it was very important. Jean Schwandis and I, the 2 white women in the white families, decided every time we would have Black guests in our home, we would always cook food from scratch. We would never buy food, open up a package and put it on a plate and serve it. We would make everything from scratch. And that's because it was a very simple way to show respect for and honor of guests who had been suffering such deep oppression for such a long time in this country, we figured it was the least we could do to honor our guests. These are some of the children at our son's birthday party. Now, once we started having these gatherings, 8 houses on our block went up for sale. Remember, we lived in an all-white neighborhood. There were no mixed neighborhoods in the late 1960s in Canton, Mississippi. Everything was separate by race. No children were allowed to play with our son. And we began to receive anonymous phone calls threatening to kill us by using dynamite bombs under our house. So now what I would like to share with you is a portion of an interview with 2 African Americans who were from the high school where Mag and I taught. They were in high school and they were beginning to come to Baha'i gatherings in our home, the Miller's home, and the Schwandes' home. What was it like for them as young Black people who had never experienced gatherings of Black and white where equality, love, respect, honor, and unity was demonstrated many times a week? What was that like for them? And so I'd like to share with you now parts of this interview with Linda Jove, who went on to get her doctorate in speech pathology, and Al McElroy, who went on to become a restaurant manager.
Thank you so much, Linda and Al, for joining me tonight. We're trying to capture some of the history of what happened in Canton, Mississippi back in the late 1960s and early 70s, when you first encountered the Baha'is and the Baha'i Faith. So Al, what was it like for you when you were in high school and you heard about the Baha'i Faith and you first started getting together with some of the Baha'is in Canton?
It was somewhat scary, skeptical. I was a little bit suspicious, but it was something I guess I always felt in my heart anyway. So it was like a new avenue, and it was a choice. And at that time, I made this conscious decision that I enjoyed being around these particular interracial people, and I accepted them. But there was always something in the back of my head, how was this going to manifest? What was going to come of it?
Thank you. Thanks, Al. So Linda, I'll ask you the same question. What was it like for you as a high school student to first learn about the Baha'i Faith and the teachings of the oneness of humanity and meeting these Black and white Baha'i families?
It was very interesting. I was a high school senior, 17 years old, and first encountered a member of the Baha'i Faith without knowing this person was a Baha'i Faith was Jean Schwandes. And this was because I was trying to write a research paper on speech pathology, and I had absolutely no material to do this. But then I had been told there is a therapist. So I'm going over, I'm meeting with her, conversing, even observing in some of her sessions. And she was just different. And I say that because in 1969, there is no such thing as commingling of Blacks and whites. Sure, there was the civil rights movement and that sort of thing, but they were just kind of looked at as those Northerners that's coming down to help with registration to vote and all of that kind of thing. And then once that was over with, that was done. So to me, it wasn't the same thing. But then when I was asked to attend a New Year's party in March, that was a bit of skepticism for me, because now I'm thinking, who has a party in March? And secondly, but probably most importantly, I'm a Black teenager and this white person is inviting me to her house. Now that's skepticism personified. Because again, that's just something that does not happen. And I was a bit hesitant about attending this meeting. And she told me that there would be other people there for association. But again, going to her house was a bit frightening, because I'm stepping out of my comfort zone, for one thing, going into her place. But then I kind of realized, if I don't go, am I putting myself in jeopardy for needing the materials to do my paper? So at that point, I decided I will go to this meeting and see what's going on. And there were several people there. They were Black, they were white. And then I just started watching what was going on. And there was this message of unity. There was, Kathy, you did the story on the suffering of Baha'u'llah. And to me, that just kind of gave it gave me hope that there is something that the races can actually come together, and that this is genuine. And in retrospect, I think now about the fact of I had to actually watch what you guys were doing. I had to listen and to see if there was a correlation between what you're saying and what you're doing. And I came to the conclusion that this is genuine. There were no masks to be pulled off. There were no aha moments. There were no, I knew it. But it was more of, this is actually real. And as a 17-year-old, I was struggling with wanting religion to be an everyday religion, not just a Sunday religion. And as a result of that, I came to the conclusion that Baha'i Faith was an everyday religion. And the principles that were talked about, the oneness of God, the oneness of mankind, the oneness of religion, those three basic onenesses, you could actually witness that. You could visualize and then verbalize what was actually happening as it related to the Baha'i Faith and the message of unity. It was the real deal.
What were some of the factors that went into your decision making?
Being a Black male, which was very dangerous. And I had to think about if I actually believe this, was it really worth taking the chance to follow through with? And I had made some kind of comment to myself and said, let me see, could I phrase it right? Because it's been 40 years since I remember saying it. If the Baha'i Faith religion were right, and I believe that and stuff like that, I would take a chance of going to hell, because I really believed in what Mag and what you was doing, and Tom, and I was just watching. But it was fearful, and I had to always be cautious, because being a Black male and hanging around white females was totally dangerous. Even going to white people's house was totally dangerous. And one of the things that it seems so simple now is, I think your house or either Tom's house was the first time I ever had to walk into a white person's house without going through the back door. And that was just amazing. It was unbelievable that you could actually walk in white people's houses and sit down and talk to them and drink and sing. And it was just, it was overwhelming, but I always was affected because my mom was constantly worried and concerned about me. So I had to be concerned about her. But I also had to be concerned about me, but I also knew that when I was with the Baha'is, I felt comfortable. And that comfort, that level of comfort was like food to my soul. It was food, it was something that I was hungry for. I was thirsty for. And probably that's one of the reasons why I took that chance, because I can't never tell you when I actually became a Baha'i on paper kind of like, but I knew that's what I wanted in my heart.
Thank you, Al. Thanks so much. Linda, would you like to speak to the same question? What did you have to think about as you were making decisions to visit the Baha'i homes, both Black and white Baha'is, where these meetings were always interracial?
First and foremost, before I started thinking about safety issues and risks factors and things like that, I was more comfortable with knowing that my quest for an everyday religion had been answered. It was more important to me in thinking about, this is my everyday religion. What I'm seeing with the Baha'is, and even though it was several days during the week, there were a couple things I think on Sundays, but it was almost, something was going on all the time. And that was my answer to, this religion is not just about Sunday. This religion is about every day. And these people are demonstrating what they're talking about every day. But then reality would set in, and I'm realizing that I am in an integrated setting. And so safety was an issue, especially after you all started getting the bomb threats and all of that. And I'm thinking, I may be in this house at a moment when that threat comes in. Is it going to be carried out? And just the thought pattern of people thinking of Blacks and whites coming together is a cause for bomb threats. But again, it was actually, I still had to think about safety. I still had to think about these risks. And kind of like Al, I was, not that I'm trying to be a martyr or anything, but I was willing to take those risks because that's what I believed in. That's what I wanted.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks to both of you talking about the safety considerations you had to think about. I think, Al, you might have been at the house when we received one of those anonymous threats. Do you have any recollection of that? What was that like for you?
I remember you answered the phone, or somebody answered the phone, and not knowing really what was going on until I think you had told somebody. I don't remember who all was there, but I know we had to be ushered out the house. I actually was looking for the bomb to go off before we even got out the house. I didn't really know, but I was almost saying, like, this is it. but I can't remember anything else. I don't remember how I got home. I don't remember whose car I came in. The only thing I remember is we was all sitting around and you answered the phone and told somebody that we got to get your kids out or something. And the bomb, I think I heard the bomb threat. And from that point on, I don't remember anything else. But it seemed like I was trying to go over in my brain, and I feel like I was in your house twice for a bum threat. I vaguely remember there was 2 times I was in your house, and they got the call for, a bomb threat.
Well, we definitely got 2 anonymous threats that they had put dynamite in our crawl space. So Linda, let me ask you, since it was real, that there were risks that were real, what went through your mind when you heard about these kinds of threats that we were receiving?
Total fear. Is this going to be it for me? Will I live beyond being 17? Okay. Will I get to accomplish the things that I want? I thought back to the meeting with Jean, and my desire, was to become a speech pathologist. Will this happen? Or will these locals, the Canton people, particularly white people, will they be successful in completing their mission of wanting to keep the races segregated? That was probably the main thing that just went through my mind.
And here you are being presented with this message of a faith that believes that God wants everybody to come together. How did that spiritual message, I don't know, empower or encourage you to move forward? Something must have encouraged you to continue down this road of investigation and inquiry.
You all talked a lot about the oneness of mankind and the analogies of the writings, the flowers of one garden. That's very easy to visualize, the beauty of it, and imagining the different races being the flowers of one garden, the waves of one sea. All of that kind of came to mind to me. And then I had been introduced to the Baha'i prayers, and I'm looking at all of the categories in the Baha'i prayers. And almost every time there were those anonymous threats that came through, someone always went to the prayers for protection. And so as a result of that, I'm thinking, this is from God. And because this is from God, and I listen to the words and the prayers for protection, armed with the power of thy name, nothing can ever hurt me. And so that became comforting to me, that don't let the verbiage of these Canton locals deter me from what I believe in. And there are instances in which you have to have faith, and your faith should drive you toward sustaining what it is that you are doing. And I realized at an early age that I wanted to be a Baha'i. I want to be a part of this religion that promotes unity. And hopefully God will speak to the minds of these folks that are trying to do harm for no justifiable reason at all, only because the racists are coming together, and they're coming together in Canton in 1969.
Al.
So friends, this video goes on for another 15 minutes or so, but I think our planners and organizers have asked us to limit our presentation to about 45 minutes. So I will stop the tape at this point. Thank you. And I want to just say, we're here for questions and answers. There's a lot of history that goes into what was going on in the background of these years in Canton, Mississippi. So the floor is open.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting and such an important topic. What are Baha'is doing to eliminate institutional racism?
Well, Baha'is are engaged all over the country addressing this issue. Many Baha'is are working in neighborhoods. We're involved in community building, assuring Black, white, and all people of color and Indigenous people are finding ways to have conversations, to form real friendships, to form organized approaches, collaborating with local governments, with local human rights and human relations councils and commissions. So it depends on where Baha'is are. I know there are some Baha'is who are working in education, trying to take a look at the practices in elementary and high school and higher education for systemic practices of racism. And so highlighting this and bringing these teachings of the oneness of humanity can be a very helpful principle that enables people from all kinds of perspectives to take a look at this from perhaps a very new approach, because the vision that Baha'u'llah has brought of the oneness of humanity and that we're all one family and we're like flowers in a garden, a lot of people have never heard of such a concept. It's a breakthrough conceptualization for many people. I can tell you what's going on in my neighborhood. I have neighbors who cannot imagine having friends who are of a different color. And this concept of the human flower garden is like brand new for them. And I'm going to share a personal story of something that happened not long after the tragic murder of George Floyd. I was on Facebook for the neighborhood and invited neighbors to come. And if they were interested in having conversations about what we could do in our neighborhood, which is very diverse, it's a very diverse neighborhood, how we can make a neighborhood where everybody here feels welcome and safe, and create a friendly, welcoming environment. And I received a phone call from the administrator of the Facebook, a neighborhood Facebook page. She said, I'm warning you, there's a man who's making very inflammatory comments about your invitation on our neighborhood Facebook page. I had to remove his comments because they were so racist and so inflammatory. And I said, well, what's his name and how can I talk with him? She said, oh no, you don't want to talk to him. And I said, actually, I would like to talk with him. So she said, okay. And she gave me his name and number, and I called him and I introduced myself. He said, oh yeah, I know who you are. I know who you are. And I said, well, I understand you had a response to my invitation. Would you like to say more? And he basically went on a tirade for about 5 to 7 minutes, and he was hollering at me. And so my phone was away from my ear listening to him. And finally he calmed down and he got quiet. And when he was finally quiet, all I said was, I hear you. I hear you. And then I went on to express the goal of our gathering that I was inviting neighbors to come to. And I said, if you would like to contribute to creating a friendly, welcoming environment right here in our neighborhood, I would be so happy for you to join us. If you can participate in this, making this vision become a reality, we would be honored for you to come. And I thought, okay, now what's going to happen? And then he was silent. And after a long pause, he said, let me think about that. And I thought, oh, wow, here's a little bit of an opening, just a little bit of an opening, just a little bit of an opening. And that is something I can work with. We can begin to have a conversation about what would it look like if everybody could walk through the neighborhood and not have to look over their shoulder and feel safe and welcome, because they know everybody in the neighborhood is creating an environment where children and youth and adolescents and college kids and grandparents can walk and feel happy and welcome and safe. So that's just a small effort in one neighborhood. And I know Baha'is all over the world are working in neighborhoods to provide a different and a new vision of what is possible. What is possible? And some folks have never been introduced to this possibility. And so it's about expanding our understanding of what could be and what can be, and that it's up to us to make it happen. I don't know if that was helpful.
Yes, it was. The next question is, how did you become a Baha'i?
Oh, that's a wonderful story. My maternal grandmother was the first person to become a Baha'i in our family. She was a single mom. She raised 8 children on her own. My mother was the eldest of the 8 children. None of her children were interested in learning about this new religion that my grandmother had just learned about, that none of them were interested. It skipped a whole generation. And she pioneered, she went to serve the Baha'i Faith in Alaska during a global teaching campaign, which was called the World Crusade, the 10-year World Crusade. My grandmother left the United States at that time and went to Alaska, which was not part of the United States at that time. And when she came back, she got a place right down the street from where I was attending community college. And so I would go to her house for lunch every now and then, and we'd have a grand time. And then in the middle of final exams, she said, Cassie, I'd like you to come to a Baha'i meeting. A young man is coming down from Champaign-Urbana. He wants to meet with all the youth. And I said, but dear grandmother, I am in the middle of final exams. I have to get straight A's. I have to get a scholarship. This is important. I cannot be distracted. And before I hung up, something said, go. And I changed my mind on the spot. And I said, I don't know why I'm saying this, but okay, I'll go. And I went to this Baha'i gathering, which was called a fireside chat. And the room was full of young people. And for 2 hours, I was mesmerized with the story of Baha'u'llah, his suffering, his imprisonment, his banishment. 20,000 of the early believers were martyred, and the teachings of the equality of women and men. I thought, what? You believe in equality of women and men? Oh my gosh. And then it went on, the equality of all colors of people. What? You believe in that? I do too. Because one of my best friends who sang in the same choir at the college was African-American. And so I thought, I've got to tell him about this. This is so exciting. Well, when I got home, I told my mom, this is really a cool religion. She said, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. I knew you would fall for this. It's a cult. I don't want you involved in it. I said, well, what do I have to do to demonstrate to you that I think this is a real thing? She said, first of all, you have to read the Bible cover to cover. Okay. And then after I read, and I kept saying, Mom, I'd read to her from the Bible. I said, Baha'u'llah's just fulfilled this promise. And after 6 weeks of that, she said, okay. We've raised you to make your own decisions. This is one of your first very important decisions. I'm not happy about it, but if you want to be a Baha'i, you have our blessing. And I thought, well, this is a miracle. She was a deaconess in our church. And so she was really invested in me staying a member of that church. And I thought it was very magnanimous of my mother to say, you have our blessing. I'm not happy about it, but you have our blessing. You're making your own decisions. And so on my 18th birthday, at the Feast of Light, the Feast of Nur, I I enrolled in the Baha'i Faith, and I have never looked back.
Thank you for sharing that. The next question is, did any of the white families show any interest while you were there?
Yes, there were a couple of white families in Canton, Mississippi, who were interested. And one of them was the son of the owner of the only jewelry store in Canton. And he was not only interested, he wanted to become a Baha'i. And he signed his declaration card, enrollment card, wanting to become a Baha'i. He believed in the Baha'i faith. And as soon as he told his parents, who owned the jewelry store, of his decision to become a Baha'i, they said, okay, that's fine, but we will disown you. You will have no means of living, and you will be ostracized. We will not speak to you again. And so he changed his mind, and he said, I can't go forward with this. I have 4 children. I have a wife. I have to stay here and support my family. So he did not send in his enrollment card. Now, the Schwandises had a neighbor who, a white neighbor, obviously our neighbors were all white because neighborhoods were segregated. And that neighbor would frequently speak with Jean Schwandis and say, I think what you're doing is the right thing to do. I think what you're doing is the right thing to do. One time the Schwandises got an anonymous bomb threat, and their house was full of high school students. And so Jean picked up the phone, and one by one, she called the parents of each of these high school students. And she said, we've just received a bomb threat. They're threatening to kill us all by blowing us up with dynamite. We have your daughter here. What do you think we should do? Parent after parent said, you have my child. You stand up to these people. You stand firm. You keep my child, and you stand firm. Phone call after phone call after phone call. Every Black parent said, do not cave into these people. Stand up to these people. And we stayed.
Thank you for sharing that. Could you talk a little bit about South Carolina during that time?
South Carolina was just beginning to pick up. I think it was 1970. We started hearing of the growth of the Baha'i faith in South Carolina. And that was a very different process. That was organic. That happened without a, quote, project planned. It started in Adams Run and the family of Alberta Dees, Dr. Alberta Dees. And within 19 hours, within about 2 days, 19 people in her family and then neighbors began to enroll in the Baha'i faith. And from there, it began to take off town by town, city by city, county by county. So that after maybe 2 or 3 years, the international governing body wrote that large-scale growth of the Baha'i faith has happened in South Carolina. And I think to this day, South Carolina has the largest number of Baha'is in the United States, about 10,000 Baha'is on the roll. It's the second largest religion after Christianity in South Carolina.
Was there any media coverage at the time about the Baha'is of Canton?
No, but I was there the first day the schools were desegregated. That was in the summer, just as school was closing in 1970, in May or June. And when it was amazing, you know, for the schools to desegregate, this is now 16 years after the law said schools should no longer be segregated. 1954 was when that ruling came down from the Supreme Court. In 1970, all the schools that were segregated had to, by federal law, be integrated and desegregated. And I was there the day the school was desegregated. 8 white students from the all-white high school came to school that day. And one of them was the president of the student council of the all-white high school. And the whole Black high school came together for an assembly. We got together in the big gymnasium. The Black high school was a brand new building. The white high school was very old and it was falling apart. So the plan for desegregation was to bring the white students to the Black high school, which was a brand new building, brand new facility. 8 students came, and one of them was the student council president, and he was asked to say a few things. And he came to the microphone, and you could have heard a pin drop, and there were hundreds of people in that gymnasium. And he said, "First of all, I just want to say that I want to be here. I'm here because I want to be here. My parents didn't force me to come here. I want to be here." And then some of the other white students made a few comments, but a little bit of background is the parents of the high school students that attended the white high school were so angry at the government for, quote, making them have Black and white students come together that they protested. And what they did is they took all the sports equipment that the white students were using, the football equipment, baseball, all the sports equipment, and they put it in the middle of the football field of the old white high school. And then they put kerosene on it and they torched it. They burned it up in protest. We're not going to have our kids' sports equipment go over to that Black school. And so then they started to form small schools in their homes, in white homes, and in white churches. And so that was their way to say, we're not going to go along with this. And only 8 white students came. And it was after that assembly meeting, I went out to the parking lot to get in my car to drive home, and there were newspaper people from all over the place in the parking lot. And one of them asked me, "So what happened? Was there a big commotion?" And I said, "It was peaceful, it was friendly, it was warm, and more than anything, it was inspiring." And I think the media person was a little astonished. I think they were hoping for some kind of big fight or rumble to happen, and there was no fight, there was no rumble. It was a very peaceful process. And I remember right after that, the next couple of days were the end of the semester, and right after that, my husband and I went on our first Baha'i pilgrimage to the Baha'i holy places in Haifa, and it was a wonderful time to recharge our batteries after what was a very arduous couple of years in Canton.
Is there a need in any place in America today where this model would still be valuable to follow?
You know, that's an interesting question. It was one of my sons who pointed out, "Well, this is kind of a new model, Mom." And I thought, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "You know, you got Black and white families together going into an area." And I thought, well, that's a good model today. That would be a great model today. Instead of just one Baha'i family going, you know, we don't have paid clergy, we don't have missionaries, but we do have the concept of pioneering, whether it's in your own country, in your own town, or abroad, internationally. Pioneers can go anywhere. You just pick up and you go. And imagine what it would be like. Where would it be appropriate for both a Black family and a white family to move someplace together? It might be a place where there are no Baha'is, where people are not familiar with the concept of the human flower garden, and that this would be a beautiful model to introduce. I think there are aspects of that of the project framework that would be very helpful and very relevant today.
Can you share with us any experience resulting from your engagement in talking with those white people about the oneness of humankind and the message of unity?
Well, you know, it's kind of like you have to plant the seed. And so first, it's important to form friendships. It's important to form relationships. We remained friends with the Gowdy family. They were the family whose husband wanted to become a Baha'i, but was not able to come all the way through because of his own reasons. You plant the seed by making friends and being a good friend. And then people may want to listen. And so I think it's important to establish real bonds of fellowship with people of all colors. And for white people, I think it's really important for us to make friendships with white people who are all over the map in terms of their views about race. I had a couple over just a week ago, 10 days ago now. No, it was last week. It was just last week. No, 2 weeks ago. And I could tell just by a few things that I said that they were not comfortable with conversations about Black and white people coming together. So I have to start at a very elementary level, which is, let's talk about the flower garden concept. And that concept was okay to introduce, because I just fed them a great meal. So they knew I wasn't going to poison them. So we had just had a nice meal together. So I think it's important to have genuine relationships, and you introduce concepts based on what you're hearing the other person say. Find out about them. So first I asked them, tell me about your families. Tell me where you grew up. What did your families teach you? And I heard the sweetest stories from this white couple about their growing up years. And that gave me enough information to know how I might be able to begin to introduce a concept of the oneness of humanity. And if I said something that was too strong, then I told myself, dial it back, pay attention, listen, find out more about what they're thinking. Don't introduce things too soon. Because the purpose here is not to come across as radical or whatever, but it's to help people grow in our own understanding. I'm learning, I'm trying to figure this out myself, how to share this concept with people who are all over the political spectrum and all over the racial affinity spectrum. So, and I've been at this, I've been doing this diversity work for over 30 years. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure a lot of this out, especially how to talk with other white people, especially people who are ultra conservative.
How is the condition now? Is there a regular radio, TV, newspaper ads by Baha'is on top of meetings at home?
Well, I know that there are meetings like this on Zoom all over the planet where people are learning about it. There have been media efforts by our national governing body and by various national governing bodies all over the world. As a matter of fact, my mother was involved in public information media campaigns when she worked at the Baha'i National Center, which is based in Wilmette, Illinois. She worked in the Office of Public Affairs. And then she was asked to serve at the United Nations, where the Baha'is are represented and have been since the founding of the United Nations. And we provide position papers there on Baha'i teachings of all manner of global issues, like the status of women, the status of slavery, the status of human trafficking, the status of children, the environment. So Baha'is are in associate with all kinds of like-minded organizations, and provide a Baha'i perspective and the Baha'i teachings and principles that we think would be most helpful to advancing the conversation. Because the whole purpose in Baha'u'llah's coming, just like the whole purpose of Jesus coming, the whole purpose of Muhammad coming, the whole purpose of Moses, is to advance humanity to the next level of our development, both spiritually and materially.
Can you say something about the rationale for buying a home in the white side of town?
Absolutely. The Schwandises, Tom and Jean Schwandis, had pioneered from Wisconsin to a little town, McMinnville, Tennessee, before they were asked to be a part of the Deep South Project. They rented a place, and as soon as they started having Black people into their homes for Baha'i meetings, guess what happened? The landlord said, I'm getting a lot of pressure from the white community. They don't like what you're doing in my property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And so they looked and looked, and nobody would let them rent another place. And so a learning from their experience was, for this project, you have to purchase your house so that you will not be evicted. If you rent, the landlord can kick you out after your first Baha'i meeting. If you own your home, you can stay and you can carry on your Baha'i meetings.
The follow-up is, my question about buying a home on the white side was not so much about purchasing versus renting, but about the location.
Yes, very good, very good. Because when the guidelines for the project were white Baha'is live in the white, this was the guidelines that were set up by the senior institutions. White Baha'is live on the white side, Black Baha'is live on the Black side. And that's how it got started. And since we were just there for 3 years, that's about as much as we could accomplish. And that was the guideline that was given to us by the designers of the project. So it was set up that way. Now, if we had been able to stay there, by the way, both my husband and I, now that I know more about how the white citizens councils operated at that time, we didn't know much about all of this. We knew about the KKK, but we did not know much about the White Citizens Council. What the White Citizens Council did was that anybody who was moving towards integration, they would go to your employers and get you fired. That's what happened to both my husband and myself. And I'm beginning to think now the reason we were both told the funding for our positions is no longer available. So we will not be able to have you for the next school year. And for him, he was in one of Lyndon B. Johnson's anti-poverty programs. It was a literacy program, which was primarily for African Americans who, because the schools were so terrible in Mississippi, the Black schools were just under-resourced, no good books, no blackboards, no desks, no tables, just under-resourced in every way. Teachers' salary was zip. So to provide literacy for Black people, it was a federal program. And suddenly the funds dried up for his program, and suddenly the funds dried up for my program. So we knew, because of our reputation and because we were getting bomb threats and people hated us, we knew that it would not be possible for us to find work in that community. And so we had to leave. And if we had played the whole video, you would have heard Linda Job say, even after you left, the foundation was so strong that 52 years later, we are still active Baha'is. And I just want to make a comment about Al. Al, as a senior in high school, could not read or write. And he says that in the interview. I could not read and I could not write. And he said, that's because of the impoverished Black school system. But then he went on to say that because he was so motivated to be able to teach this faith to others, he wanted to learn to read and write. And as an adult, he learned to read and write. And the reason, he said, is so that I could teach others about this wonderful faith. And today, Al serves on the local governing body of the Baha'is of Jackson, Mississippi, along with his son and grandson. 3 generations of Al's family have now embraced these teachings of the oneness of humanity as both a spiritual and social teaching, and it's changed their lives profoundly.
The interview you shared, is the full interview available to everyone?
It could be. Maybe we can talk about how you can upload that.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that.
Because they talk a lot more about Dr. Carney and the influence that she had in their lives.
That's great. Would you do it the same way today?
Oh, I think we've learned a lot. In some aspects, I think we'd do the same. Definitely purchase a home. Depends on the environment in which we're going. I think we've learned a lot more about how to enter an environment and how to build bridges. I think I'd spend more time building relationships, not just with individuals, but also with organizations, and doing a lot of educational work and forging a lot of friendships. And I think I don't think I'd hold back on when to begin interracial gatherings, because that would just be part and parcel of life. Life now, I mean, I live in an interracial neighborhood by choice. If I were going into a backwater town where interracial activities was not the norm, I would be sensitive and I would find a way to be as culturally astute as possible and introduce the faith and socializing in as wise and prudent a way as possible, but I would not compromise.
Okay, looks like we're at time. So thank you so much again. This was really insightful and an amazing story. And we'll be in touch about how to upload maybe that interview, the rest of it as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And so if anyone is not on our mailing list or not subscribed to our YouTube channel, I've put the links for that in the chat. And our speaker next week will be Dr. Robert Stockman, and he'll be talking about Abdul Baha in America. So again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye.